What is the biggest, "this relationship won't last," red flag you've ever seen at a wedding? The pastor at the wedding, in front of a couple hundred people, said, "Can you believe that just 2 months ago, bride's name was in my house, crying because she was so lonely and wanted to be married so badly? And now look at her 2 months later, getting married to a guy she met the next day." Even her elderly grandmother laughed out loud. Attended a wedding where the bride talked, not about her love for him or how great he is, but more about how he changed so much of his personality for her and how that made everything perfect. The groom had the ring in his pocket but forgot which one, and the bride, visually annoyed, said, "That's the kind of guy I'm marrying." They divorced within the year. I worked as a county prosecutor. I did a sentencing where the guy was sent to prison for about 2 years. As I was walking out of the courtroom, his girlfriend asked the judge to marry her to her boyfriend, who was going to prison. Judge said she needed a marriage license and there was a 2-day waiting period. He was basically telling her not to marry the guy. She pulls out the marriage license. The judge then says, "You need 2 witnesses." She was alone. The dude's attorney grabbed me by the arm and enthusiastically volunteered us to be the witnesses. The wedding went through and now I have a story for Reddit. A side note, the guy was in an orange jumpsuit and was shackled, literally shackled, during the ceremony. TLDR, sentenced man to prison then served as best man in his wedding. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding, and right after the ceremony the bride told me this wasn't actually a wedding because the groom couldn't get married as he was still married to someone else. She was 3 months pregnant and was throwing a fake wedding to please her religious family and collect money/gifts. So that was cool. They divorced within a year. At the end of the ceremony she changed into an extremely fancy going-away outfit, tight and purple and laced up down the sides. He changed into an old t-shirt and shorts that reeked of stale student bachelor sweat and said, "Oh, I didn't know we were dressing up." She gave him a look of the purest hatred and disgust. They separated 6 months later. The groom forgot the bride's name during his toast to her and called her a similar but very different name. Like, if her name was Brenda, he called her Brittany. It lasted 2 years. Oddly, the wedding where the bride started labor during the reception is going strong 10 years later. It was absolutely a shotgun wedding. Her father pretty much told him either man up and marry her, or get out of her life so she could find the kid a real father. The groom was at the time a stoner who most of our family disliked, and somehow between her 3rd trimester and the birth he straightened up. He worked for a few years, got injured and became a stay-at-home dad while she worked. Plus, while he was working, she was going to school for her special education certification, and he never once tried to discourage her or imply that it was a stupid job to want the way her mother did. During the vows the bride laughed at the "for richer or poorer" part and wouldn't say it. Somehow they're still going strong. I sure hope he never loses his job. Groom was sending texts to a very uninterested bridesmaid all night. Groom was also more interested in getting wasted with his buddies than being with the bride. There were also red flags before the wedding. He had hit her on at least one occasion. I believe he cheated and then proposed in an attempt to convince her he'd be faithful going forward. They were also in different places in their lives. She had just finished her master's and gotten a job in that field, and he was an unmotivated college dropout. No surprise they were divorced in less than a year. Years ago I attended a wedding and reception of a friend and neighbor. At the reception the bride started crying. Not happy tears either, long, heartfelt sobs. 10 months later she had a baby, and the next month he beat her up so bad she passed out on the front lawn. Her ex, who was a big guy and father of her first 2 children, came over their house and dragged the new husband out by his hair and beat his ass on the front lawn. New hubby left town and she divorced him right after that. Then we found out his first wife divorced him for beating her up too. I was best man at my mate's wedding. The bride hit on me. After the ceremony, the bride, who had epilepsy, had a seizure, and her family took her into a side room away from all the guests to look after her until she'd recovered. The groom didn't bother to go and help look after his wife. He was too busy getting drunk and partying with all his mates. Even after the bride recovered enough to return to the celebrations, he didn't stay with her or comfort her, and she sat there in tears for half the night. It lasted a couple of years before they divorced due to his selfishness. The groom wouldn't stop talking about the marriage like it was a prison sentence. He incessantly went on about how it was the end of his freedom and how he was going to be tied down to the ball and chain now. They were divorced in just under a year. In my friend's vows he was talking about her eyes which were blue and he called them green. Also they got married on the girl's 18th birthday because her parents wouldn't let them get married earlier. The bride was 32 to 48 years old. She was a compulsive liar. Said she had 2 to 4 kids but that her ex killed them and got away with it. Married the groom within 3 months of meeting. He was 21 and a virgin. She drove a wedge between him and his extremely close family. She made him quit his waiter job because he wasn't allowed to talk to women. They got married in a Waffle House parking lot. Last I heard they were still together. He can no longer have friends so I can't talk to him. I'm a woman so he's double banned. The groom was madly in love with his fiancée, as one would hope. Always got the vibe she just wasn't that into it. During the wedding he was so nervous he stuttered. Bride rolled her eyes and looked pissed. Then later in the night after dinner and music had started, the bride got annoyed people weren't staying in their allocated seats. They had a wishing well for presents. We added our anonymous gift with a card and thought that was that. 1 week later get an abusive call that we did not put in. This ended up getting so bad it tore down multiple friendships for the groom. Bride wanted enough money to buy a house. Turns out bride was cheating on him the whole time, with someone who was also married. When the ex-girlfriend stood up to object with a pregnancy stick in her hand. "Positive it's you," she said. My cousin's wedding, he was in the army, his bride was 6 months pregnant, a senior in high school, and she had just turned 18 the previous day. Her grandfather was the officiant and he gave a big speech about how marriage was only between one man and one woman and no one can tear apart what God puts together. They opened their gifts in front of everyone like it was a birthday party. There was no alcohol, dancing, or food. Within 30 to 40 minutes after the gift opening the happy couple peeled out of the Boy Scout lodge, doing donuts while her teenage friends cheered them on. They spent the night at the hotel everyone was staying at, separately, which consisted of him getting shit-faced with his friends while she was alone in their room. In front of our entire family my sister said, "I give them a year." She was wrong though. Within 3 months of the kid coming they had split and my cousin swears the kid isn't his. The whole wedding was one giant fucking red flag. I saw the newly married couple step out of an elevator, and he accidentally stepped on her dress. She snapped and turned around, yelling "Do that again and see what happens." He was stone-faced and without saying anything, immediately went to the bar for a beer. I wasn't actually there, but a girl I went to school with posted video of her ceremony on FB. Groom was so drunk the best man had to hold him upright. Lots of swaying and random, incoherent babbling. Bride didn't seem particularly fazed by it and had a sort of, just ignore him and let's get on with it, kind of attitude. There was also an album of photos and the groom was flipping off the camera in literally every pic he was in. I was honestly shocked that the officiant went through with the ceremony, and doubly shocked she put it out there for everyone to see. Divorced less than a year later. Bride told me and my partner a few weeks earlier that she didn't want to go through with it. She had generic vows, husbands were beautiful. She had a sour face the whole time, it was almost funny. It ended up turning out that she was shagging my partner the last year and she left her husband for him 4 months in. I dodged a bullet. Went to a wedding for one of my older, male, cousins who has 2 sisters about my age. Apparently the bride talked to the oldest sister, whom the groom was very close to, and said something like "Just so you know, you're not the most important girl in his life anymore. I am. Can't wait to see how this one plays out." Groom was making out with a bridesmaid while his new bride proceeded to get blackout drunk and cry in the corner. The groom wanted to delay the wedding so they could do a last-minute Taco Bell run. They were divorced within 18 months. The bride did not smile, neither during the ceremony nor during the reception. She never cracked a smile. Attended a very big, very religious wedding of a 21-year-old bride and a 22-year-old groom. They lied about where they met, it was on Tinder. During a round of Truth or Dare with the groom and his members of the wedding party the night before, he admitted his biggest love language is touch, but that his so hated to express affection physically. All he wanted was to be cuddled sometimes, and she'd refuse. He said he hoped it got better after they were married. All the groomsmen made frantic eye contact and changed the subject. Older guy marrying a young Eastern European. The groom's friend said at the reception, "This party is great. I hope I get invited to the one next year." The guy had been married a few times before. The bride and groom got in an argument post-reception and the bride ran away. It was in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but we ran around all night trying to find her. LOL. What an adventure. Edit. Since so many are asking, yes, we found her after a couple hours. LMAO. She was near the hotel just chilling outside acting like nothing happened. The other day a co-worker told me about a wedding she was just in the bridal party for. The groom and his mother were counting out how much each family gave as a cash gift and giving the bride grief because her family weren't able to give as much as the groom's family. I feel like that's an insanely bad way to start a marriage. The groom spent almost the entire wedding glued to his female work colleague, to the point that the bride had to drag him away for their first dance. They also kept going off somewhere together. A friend tried to follow them outside, but it was too dark to locate them. You could see the obvious hurt on the bride's face throughout the day. Prior to the wedding he'd taken his colleague away abroad for his stag, do, just the two of them, despite the bride's protests, and in his wedding speech he pointed his colleague out and told her that he'd had the best time of his life that weekend. They're still together at the moment, but I don't see it being the happy ending that the bride was so desperate for. Nobody attended my wedding, so I guess that. Bride going home with the best man. Not kidding. Only 45 minutes into reception. Processional music was options by Pedro the Lion. I could never divorce you. Without a good reason. And though I may never have to, it's good to have options. That marriage lasted a year and a half. The groom refused to get dressed and wore a black t-shirt and sneakers. The bride looked incredible in her gown and he looked like he was popping to the shops for a pack of ciggies. Groom was clearly having a good time, bride was visibly uncomfortable. When it came time for vows, the groom had a long list and read it off nicely. The bride said something along the lines of, "I'm just gonna wing it, basically you're my best friend," and trailed off soon after. Thank God for the open bar. Not at a wedding, but I knew a guy who had been having problems with his girlfriend for a while. So the best solution he could come up with? Proposing. Just FYI, proposing/marrying someone isn't going to magically fix the problems. Edit. I guess to add my own story, getting married in a library just because you're pregnant and need good health insurance spells disaster. So a year and a half later, I'm single and much happier that way. I'm the keyboard player for a wedding band, so I've seen all sorts of ridiculous shit at weddings that would qualify as a red flag. That said, one stands above the rest, the groom aggressively grinding on two of the bridesmaids, simultaneously, one of which was the bride's sister. The groom said the wrong name during the vows. At the reception there is a local tradition for the groomsmen to steal the bride. Basically they do a quick bar hop and come back to continue the reception. My husband was a groomsman, and as more than an hour passed, I finally called him. He said she was having a blast and wouldn't leave. The groom had arrived back after about 30 minutes, laughed it off at first, then relief when she finally blew back and totally smashed. They made it about 2 months after that. I've posted about this before. It was my wedding. The groom stopped the entire ceremony, which was held at our place, so he could watch The Simpsons. There was no discussion about this beforehand, he just did it. No, we are not still married. Shocking, I know. The father of the bride made a speech about how he saw his daughter organizing the groom over time. Basically, instead of telling a story of their burgeoning love, it was a tale of how she began to control him over time. Was cringy. Lasted 3 years. There was a part of the ceremony where the bride and groom were kneeling at the altar. On the bottom of the groom's shoes were 2 pieces of tape that read "Help" and "Me" on them. Never was clear whether he put them there or was pranked by his groomsmen, but it felt like an omen. They lasted less than a year. Technically the day before the wedding, my mil-to-be gave me some of her nice jewelry but added that she wanted some of it back when we got divorced, not if. A year and a half later, as we got divorced, I sent all of it back to her, which apparently surprised her. PSA, I wish people realized how hard it is to make a marriage work through all the normal pitfalls when family members are not supportive or even downright unsupportive. The bride-to-be of my friend would not let him participate in the entire bachelor party. It wasn't even a risque itinerary, more of just a guy's night with drinking and poker and such. So we essentially had his stag without him. She posted on Facebook that it was the worst day of her life. My dad got drunk and made out with a bridesmaid at his reception. My parents never got divorced. It was a small, intimate wedding and the couple just played music on a stereo instead of hiring a DJ/utilizing a sound system. He had made a mixtape CD and wanted to play it at the reception. She patted his arm and said, "Oh sweetie, no one but you wants to hear that." They were divorced within a year of the wedding. Dude I used to know called off the wedding with less than 24 hours to go. His bride had gone out for her bachelorette party and came back to their place shit-faced. While walking through their bedroom under the black lights they had, he saw a big glowing white stain in the crotch of her pants running halfway down one thigh. Cue their last fight, where she eventually admitted to banging multiple guys during the party and bringing their gravy train on home to the love of her life. It was all over but the cryin'. My brother-in-law vowed to get fat with my sister while reciting his vows. Considering my sister is already kinda overweight, I found that a rather strange thing to say.